What's up, sneaky people? It's your boy FB Kicks and Gear, and I am back with another Travis Scott Jordan 1 Low Olive legit checking guide. And this is what, part 3 now? I know at the very least I might have one more or two more in me depending on the different batches that I find, but this is the third installment and I am really doing my best to get this information out here. You know, part of what makes these videos important isn't even necessarily what I say or what I show you, but the fact that you guys are getting exposed to different batches, seeing what something looks like in the same environment under the same lighting as an authentic pair, that might help you be able to identify a rep in person. And that kind of stuff is important when you are shopping on the secondary market, especially if you're trying to do local deals where you can save the most money. So pay attention to that kind of stuff, guys. Don't just look at what I say and what I point to. Try and look at the other things. I try to get as many angles and visuals as I can, but just like in every other video, I tell you guys that you don't have to just rely on me. Go to the Instagram account on the screen and you can see all the different pictures and angles of the reps so that you know exactly what you should be looking for and paying attention to. So with all that said, guys, let's get into the video, and we're going to start with a very brief comparison of the boxes. One thing I'm super surprised about, because you don't usually see this, but the rep boxes have consistently been the same size with retail for this release. So this is the third pair that I've done, and it's the third pair that has a box that is the same size as the authentic pair, more or less. And I'll put the authentic one on top so that you guys can get a really good visual. I would say the biggest differences in between the authentic box and the fake box is the greens are definitely different. The green is definitely a lighter green, and you can see that here. It's more of a army green on top for the authentic and more of like a faded olive green for the rep. And outside of that, the box itself on the authentic pair is a lot lighter than the box on the rep. The rep has definitely got more of a cream vibe going to it. And then from there, we will look at the size tags. One thing that is usually a good indicator if you are not dealing with higher end reps is the authentic pair has an RFID chip behind the size tag, and it's hard to see. Hopefully maybe you guys can see it with the lighting, but it's hard to see behind the tag. But there are reps that do have RFID tags on the box, and this rep does, and sometimes you can see it behind. Hopefully you guys can see it, but if you don't, take my word for it. If you're looking at it, pull out a pair of shoes that you have personally and try and look for that RFID tag so you know what it looks like, but it's usually hidden behind the size tag. So both pairs have RFID chips, so unfortunately for this you can't use that, but not every rep will have an RFID chip, but every authentic pair will. So that's a nice little easy low-hanging fruit to look at. Other than that, you'll take a look at the size tags, and usually what I do, and I say this in every video, I look for the smallest text on the authentic pair so that I can compare it to the smallest text on the rep pair, because that's where you'll most easily see the different font and weight differences between the two texts. But when I look at this, they look pretty identical to me. Usually I'll go to the made in China, and it's super thin and not bold on the authentic pair, and then when you look at the rep, also super thin and not bold. So this is probably the closest box label that I've ever seen when doing these comparisons. So that's just something to look at. Not every batch is going to be as good as this one in terms of the box, so pay attention. It might not work for 100% of reps to easily disqualify them, but it will work for some, so it's always worth checking. Now that we have talked about the box, let's take a look at the shoe. And the first thing that we're going to take a look at, and it's the easiest thing to take a look at, is side by side, take a look at the reverse swooshes. Now there's a catch to being able to legit check when it comes to reverse swoosh. So as you can see, my authentic reverse swoosh is completely flat. There's no motion, there's no movement. It's a very short-haired nubuck. and you can see that it's not like your traditional Travis Scott Jordan 1 where you see a lot of motion and the nubuck is transitionary. Not the case for the authentic pair, my authentic pair. But there are authentic pairs that do have motion very similar to this rep. And based on my research from what I've seen, those pairs were mostly released in Asia. So take that for what you will. I don't want to go too in depth into it because my research can only give me a finite amount of pairs to look at. But that's generally what I've seen. And what you will see is a swoosh that is very close to this color, but it will have the same kind of motion like this. So if I'm trying to legit check, the only way I'd be able to say that based on my knowledge that this is rep is because the color is just ever so slightly different. In fact, this is honestly probably the closest that I've seen to some of those Asian examples. This is the closest reverse swoosh that I've personally seen in my legit checking as well. This is very, very good. Even though this has got that motion going on, the color and tone are very, very, very close. But I would like to see it just a little bit darker, but with more motion, so it will look more like the authentic pair. But that is how I generally take a look. Another thing that I've noticed is that, and I don't know if this was my pair specifically, if this is a fluke, or if this is because it's a woman's Jordan 1, but my sole for this shoe specifically has a weird curve to it, almost like the sole bananas up. And if I look at this one, it doesn't do it as much, but it still kind of has that weird kind of banana shape to it. I don't know if that has anything to do with it being a woman's pair or not, but that's just something I notice. Reps tend to be like normal, straight, not bananaing up like my authentic pair, but just something that I noticed. But when you compare, the midsole colors are very, very close. And as I mentioned in other videos, there is a range for midsole colors. They do have light and dark midsoles for authentic pairs. A lot of that has to do with the differences between the pairs that released in America, or North America, I should say, and the pairs that released in Asia. But this is definitely within retail striking distance in my opinion. So far pretty good. This is probably one of the better ones that I've seen so far. Usually though, when you look at all those things like the reverse swoosh and the midsole that can be different, there's one deciding factor, and that is the outsole. And the outsole is usually a slightly different color, but man, yes, actually I was about to say that I think this is actually the same color, but it's not. The rep is just a slight bit more green than the authentic pair, which is a duller, kind of more military camo looking green. But other than that, I'm actually pretty blown away so far by how good this is. And we'll take a look at the inside here. Now I can see a difference. When you take a look at the inside here, you get a look at that reverse swoosh again. Again, very close in color, which is rare from what we've been seeing on my channel so far. But the one thing that I can see, which is usually pretty typical of a rep, Travis Scott Jordan 1 in general, is that very bold, very thick Cactus Jack. Look how prominent that is on the rep compared to the authentic pair, which is flat, almost textured, while the rep has a gloss to it. That is not something that I've seen on any authentic pair so far, so very interesting. I know that on the Phantoms that there's actually a pretty wide degree of how these Cactus Jacks can look, but I have not seen that as being the case on these pairs. So pay attention to that. That is actually a pretty good legit check indicator. While we're here, we'll talk about the black nubuck. I gotta say, one of my comments on the other batches was that the nubuck was actually softer and longer haired on the reps than on the authentic pair. You see the authentic pair, it's pretty soft, but it doesn't have that motion, that transition that you're used to seeing on the nubuck of Travis Scott Jordan 1s. And this batch specifically definitely has the same type of nubuck. It's not super nap dense, if that makes sense, meaning there's not a whole bunch of fibers here like the authentic pair. I'll say the rep is definitely a bit more faded and worn in, if that makes sense, and you can see that on the insides too. But in terms of material, this is probably the closest one that I've seen so far. Pretty nice. And then when you take an aerial look though, you look at the toe box shapes and they are pretty different. The authentic pair has that you know, pointed, narrow look, while the Rep definitely has that club looking, bulky aesthetic. And you can see how it's rounded out at the bottom here. So this is definitely a different batch from what we've been seeing so far on the channel. But so far, there are things that me personally, I would be more worried about on this than on the other pairs. But let's continue on. You know, now that we've talked about the color and the materials, let's take a look at the overall shape. Overall, I would say this is more so shaped like the older Travis Scott Jordan 1 lows, like the fragments and the reverse mochas. From what I've seen, the olives have this distinct shape that is just different. If you look at that toe box, it kind of slopes upward as opposed to bulging out, and you can see that difference in the shape of the toe box pretty clearly, in my opinion. And when you take a look at the back, you can see a pretty similar shape. Maybe the Rep is just a tad bit thicker and bulkier in the width department. The white leathers also has this very slight warm tint to it, where the authentic pair is a bright white, and you can actually see a little bit of contrast there in the soles as well in terms of color. So far I would say that these are definitely a different batch from the ones that I've seen, but still relatively legit checkable. The next thing that we'll move on to is the laces, because as we've seen in other videos, the laces struggle. We're specifically going to look at the red and the olive green laces, because we know the black and white laces are pretty easy to match. When you put these right next to each other, you can see the same thing as you've seen in other videos. Definitely some visible differences. The Rep lace is definitely more vibrant than the authentic lace, which is a tad bit darker and duller. Get a real up close look at that. And then the olive green is also a very similar case. The olive green laces are just a tad bit brighter and more vibrant on the Rep than they are on the authentic pair. And I'll tell you what, guys, that's usually the name of the game. You're not going to find quality differences when it comes to Reps and retail anymore. And some people will say that's because Nike is getting worse, maybe a little bit, but it's also because these Rep manufacturers have stepped up the quality. These shoes pretty much make themselves now. Obviously, you've got the human labor and everything like that, but machines do so much of it that it gets that much easier for a factory to set up and make an authentic pair. So very close in terms of quality, but where you will find the differences is in the accuracy, the tone of the materials, things like this, where you can see that the colors of both the Nike Air tongue tag and the Cactus Jack tag are just slightly different. You can see that the Nike Air on the Rep on the right is a duller red, while the authentic pair is definitely a more vibrant red. And you can see there are tone differences in the Cactus Jack tag as well as the letters. The background of the Cactus Jack tag is more of a warmer off-white, and the green is definitely a lighter olive green, while the authentic pair is not as warm on the backing, and the Cactus Jack is definitely a darker olive green. And they definitely feel a little bit different too. The Reps feel like a thinner patch. And from there, we'll swing it around back just to take a look at the embroidery. You guys know that the embroidery is probably one of the worst quality things about Travis Scott Jordan 1 lows. They all look like shit to me, so I don't like to use it as an authenticator, but take a look at that. Maybe you guys see some different things. And there's the other shoe. Now, before doing the blacklight test, there's one telltale sign that I found on other Reps, and I want to see if this one has it. So let's take out the insoles and we'll talk about that test. So in the other videos, we see that when we take out this insole on the authentic pair, this is the authentic insole. Pay attention to the way this hair is. You see how it's not blocky, it's wiry, it's not really full. Reps tend to get this really full and blocky. So let's see if these ones have those insoles. So exactly how I said. Notice how the Rep is just not as defined on that hair specifically. Colors are a little bit different too, but take a look at that. I'm not going to do a blacklight test on this because I've done it on 2 batches already, and you guys know what to expect. The only thing that should be lighting up on an authentic pair is the Cactus Jack thing on the tongue, and that's exactly what the reps do as well. So I'm not going to do the black light test for this video, and I'll keep it a little short for you guys. Without the black test, that really wraps up this video, guys. These shoes are still very legit checkable in my opinion. The variants that comes with the sole and the reverse swoosh are pretty good indicators still, even though they can look different. There's still a wrong way for them to look, and that's something you can hone in on. For this batch specifically, easiest way to tell in my opinion, pull out the insole, take a look at that Cactus Jack hair, and you can see it. Also, this is very, very bold and prominent. I know that that's not the way these are supposed to look, so that is a very good indicator as well. Laces are good as well. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much it. And remember, you can see as many pictures as you need of this shoe on the Instagram account on this page. So please go there, study up, guys. I'm telling you, these reps are getting really good. And if you don't know how to legit check, it's about time you learn, because they're only going to get better. So with all that said, guys, I will see you in the next one. Peace.